Welcome back to Building Better Businesses in ABA with me, Jonathan Mueller. It's a weekly podcast about the forces reshaping our autism services field. Learn from successful entrepreneurs, payers, investors, and leaders in applied behavior analysis. Thank you, kind listener, for letting me into your world today. Now on to the show. Tiffany Feingold is an accomplished business leader with over 22 years of experience in the fields of healthcare and education. In 2020, Tiffany and her husband founded Guiding Bright Minds, a community of educators, professionals, and parents dedicated to helping guide and educate parents of neurodivergent children on their journey. In 2022, Tiffany co-founded the Colorado Neurodiverse Chamber of Commerce. Tiffany's motivation and passion for Guiding Bright Minds and the Chamber stems from her own personal journey as a parent of a neurodivergent child. Tiffany, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you, Tiffany. And, as far as I'm aware, the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce is the first of its kind in the U.S. Tell me more about what inspired you and your co-founders to get it started.
Yeah, it's shocking to hear you say that. And it's shocking every time that we talk about it being the first in the United States and most likely in the world. And when we think about 2022, and we think about the world we are of inclusion and acceptance, and to have the opportunity to be the first, pretty exciting. And it stems from a conversation, that we had with Amanda, Danny, and I all working together to say, how can we collaborate just with our experiences individually as we're doing in the neurodiversity community? And it was through those conversations that it came about that we needed to look at a chamber and chamber support. And through that conversation, when we brought it up and saw that, hey, there's no neurodiversity chamber of commerce anywhere in the country. And all of us are looking at each other thinking we're all CEOs of our own organization. Danny with Tax, Amanda was Firefly Autism, and myself with Guiding Bright Minds. And we're thinking, oh, we can't, that's a lot. That's a huge task to create a chamber. And then we thought about it as, how can we not? We have an obligation, especially uncovering that it's not out there and looking at the world today of unemployment and some of the staggering statistics that I'm sure we'll get into. We felt that we cannot do this and move forward with creating this opportunity.
Yeah, I was so fortunate a couple of months ago to be at the initial meeting. It was inspiring. But in addition to being inspiring, it's like, this is a freaking no-brainer. And I'd love for you to share maybe a little bit more the stats that you've seen on unemployment rates, not only of autistic adults, but just that, let's look at this extraordinarily low unemployment environment we're in as a country. One way to solve this is to take this population and make sure that businesses are fully ready and capable to work with them successfully. Any kind of stats you can share would be helpful. And I'm just curious, what's gotten in the way in the past of, you think, neurodiversity chambers of commerce getting started and creating these opportunities?
I think there's a fear of the unknown. There was a survey done in England with over 800 employers, and of the 800 that were surveyed, 50% said they would not hire somebody if they knew that they were neurodivergent. Those are staggering statistics. And I think that stems, like I said, from the unknown of what that looks like. We just launched 2 months ago. It came to fruition within 4 weeks when we launched it, from the date of August 16th to say go to when we launched it on September 16th, to bringing it to the forefront, because we're dedicated, to being a leader in providing neurodiversity affirming business practices, ensuring both businesses and individuals reach maximum potential. But like you said, I don't think it's just unique to the neurodiversity world. I think overall in general, we're seeing employers struggling to find quality employees, to find or connect or have them become committed employees as far as their loyalty and finding that space. And so what we want to do is not just on the neurodivergent population, but also in whole, what is our practices for hiring? What is our practices in the resume process? I talked to one autistic who was in an interview process. He has a college degree from Yale, and they asked him what color he is, if he could color. And in his mind, there's so much to that thought process that our personality tests important in all jobs that are out there, probably in sales jobs. Yeah, you probably need that. You need that to be able to connect. But what we want to look at is the whole universal process of how we hire, retain, and onboard employees. And we're just shedding light on that neurodivergent community, saying that there's some ways that are appropriate, but I don't know anyone who's ever gone out in the new job saying that was the best onboarding experience. Wow, I loved that interview process. It is something that we have to just, as a whole, take a look at. What does that mean? And is it set up for success? Some people are good at, you know, talking their way through an interview. Some aren't, but the one who talks their way the best through that, are they necessarily the best person for that position? And so it is so much, Jonathan, in opening the doors to say, let's look at how we've done our hiring practice. What does that mean? What is that onboarding? And look at the uniqueness of every individual, not just those that are neurodivergent, but those that might need different accommodations or different things. But that's pretty much every employee as we go.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking to is probably like subpar interview and hiring practices at any organization. I mean, if we were to focus really specifically on neurodivergent adults, the kinds of barriers that they face in a traditional interview and application process, that was a great example of like, what color are you? Like, how do you really respond to that, right? Are there other examples of those kinds of obstacles that neurodivergent individuals run into?
Yeah, because there's the assumption that you look me in the eye, have this conversation, be bold, be voiced, and not everyone's like that. You have introverts, you have extroverts. You have those that, lights are too bright or the type of light shining or loud noises. And that's okay. When you look at the statistics that shows that I know 89% or 85 actually percent of autistics with college degrees remain unemployed who are highly qualified. We're looking not at huge adjustments that need to be made, but once they are in place, once they have been onboarded, then once they're at a good fit, the results show that there is up to 140% better production. Loyalty's there, the creativity's there. So all it is these mild modifications to say, let's look at what and who is going to be the best fit. And look, if it's a job that maybe is ongoing, that doesn't need to be 9 to 5, can somebody work over the evening hours? Is there an opportunity during a staff meeting for somebody who can't sit for a full hour to walk around? I think, what we hear from a lot of employers too are, well, I don't know, that's going to change the social aspect of my team, or is that going to impact how others feel and comfortability? And what we need to know and understand too, Jonathan, just like in all walks of life, we are going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. We don't ask all the right questions, but also giving grace to allow for those mistakes to be made and those mistakes to be had. When we think about working with employers, it's not having a separate, division center for those who are neurodivergent, because any population would want to be, oh, okay, you're considered neurodivergent, so here's our onboarding process for you. I mean, that's kind of insulting, actually. But what it does also is having a conversation of inclusion of what it means, knowing that it doesn't matter if somebody's going to be on their computer all day doing data entry, or if they're a data processor, if they make eye contact with somebody, is that crucial to their success? Or the level of knowledge of the details of the job they're doing more crucial to that success? So I think it's just a mind shift in looking at what makes sense of the job the employers are looking to hire and what's appropriate in hiring that job, and having conversations with other employers who are maybe neurodivergent themselves, other employers who have been successful. And that's what we want to create with the chamber, is a community that works collectively together, knowing that there are going to be, again, mistakes, mishaps, but being okay with that. The first step to improving what this looks like is by having those conversations and knowing that you're not going to be perfect and that's okay.
Mm. It's powerful because that speaks to my long held conviction that this is not just about like job training for neurodivergent individuals or autistics. This is about changing how we think as a community and how we interact with groups that don't, on the surface, maybe look or sound like who we are. And it feels incredibly important. And to the point where, as I understand it, Tiffany, Governor Jared Polis and his team have been supporters of the chamber going back to inception. So A, is that true? Gut check me. But B, why, if so, like, why are they so bullish on the work that you're all doing?
Yeah. So when we actually had the launch, he posted it on his Facebook and support for that and recognizing what we're doing in trailblazing. And I think definitely that support because being a trailblazer for Colorado, saying, hey, Colorado's the first in the country to launch this, to recognize this, to know that there has to be change and something needs to be done. And then as a governor looking at unemployment rates and the statistics and knowing that there are amazing, qualifiable people to fill those seats. How do we collectively work to do that? So yeah, we've actually had several conversations with some people at the governor's office in different departments because one of the things we want to do is having those communities and especially starting off with policy. What does policy look like? How do we support and make sure that inclusion is happening? Because when the reality is you look at, there's a lot of diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion teams in the organization, most of them don't include neurodiversity.
Mhm.
So it's like, let's take the blinders off to the whole world. What does that mean for every person? And when you think back in time, Jonathan, time where people were like, well, did women really go into the workforce? Well, does a minority have the, ability? I mean, the conversations that we had really not too long ago are the same conversations now that we're seeing with this community. And it's so unfortunate when you see some of these resumes of somebody graduating with honors from Yale, the level of focus and detail, and going to 20 job interviews and not landing one of them. There's a problem with the system because this person is so qualified and once again hired, once understood, will be that end all be all employee. We know, based on her statistics, that the neurodivergent community has that level of loyalty, create, they have this longing to connect, but just understand they might not connect in the same way we do. So much growth and opportunity, but it's great to have that recognition, especially from the local leaders here in Colorado.
Yeah, it's phenomenal to know that our state is paving the way for what I think a generation from now, to your point, we'll look back and say, how the heck did we not as a society? Or why were we discriminating as we are now against neurodivergent individuals? And I want to ask you more about your own son's neurodivergent journey. And I'm sure in the back of your mind, you're thinking about the world that you might want him to live in and be part of the workforce in someday. Can you tell me a little bit more about your son? How he inspired you to start guiding bright minds and has continued to inspire you?
Yes. Well, and I think that's what's most incredible about this is being inspired personally from your own personal journey and meeting those other entrepreneurs or people that have been impacted so much because of some personal experience. And for me, ultimately, it kind of brought me back to, I think, my DNA at the core of the person that I am. I went to school for child psychology. When I moved to Colorado, I took a completely different path. Well, my passion's always been there for people and helping. And my husband grew up with dyslexia and ADHD, and I saw him suffer. And I saw the impact of what insecurity can be like when you are judged for not being the same as others. Why aren't you reading? Are you lazy? He was called by teachers stupid. And that's heart wrenching that in today's society, not understanding that all of us are going to have some differences in how we learn. We all have different abilities. We all have different ways in which We like things and learn things and are creative. So being open-minded to that. And then when I saw my son struggling in school, getting kicked out of daycares and swim lessons because he had high sensory processing. And so when it was loud and overstimulating, he had a hard time controlling and that made his impulses even that much greater. So, it breaks your heart as a parent. You just want your child to be happy. You want them to fit in. You want them to be accepted. And so watching that and knowing that at a half day kindergarten, which was only 4 hours, he's in the principal's office every day and thinking, okay, we have quite a journey ahead of us because I want my child to be truly at peace with who he is and what his abilities are. And maybe some of the abilities are not, and that's okay. So my husband and I decided, in talking with the community, this amazing community that we're in with several professionals, of where you see gaps for parents because it is hard. It is overwhelming when you're going through that, when you're getting calls daily and you see it's the school and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to also work and trying to be a parent, trying to figure this out. And so that's how Guided Bright Minds came about. Is I wanted to help parents because I know what it's like on that journey. I know when you feel hopeless and you feel lost and you're just like heart is broken because all you want to do is help your child. And so being able to help parents through that process, and that's why we created this network of professionals. We created this community to work collaboratively together to really just help parents and create an opportunity that we're all working together. Great people, kind of like the chamber of two in that sense. We all do great work individually. How do we come together to impact education? I mean, again, Jonathan, I go back to 2022, and so many parents are still struggling with schools and IEPs and 504s and with dyslexia and ADHD and all of that. And it's our kids that are impacted. It's our kids that are getting hurt every day from just not being understood. So it's definitely pulling on the heartstrings of what we can do to make a difference for the community.
Yeah, it's super inspiring what you've created over the last almost 3 years now with Guiding Bright Minds. But tell me, like, what is the world going to look like if Guiding Bright Minds is wildly successful?
Oh, there's so much I want to do. Wildly successful is knowing that a parent has a resource, that place that they can go to find vetted, qualified providers. That's the first step because we know you can go on the internet and you can go countless hours searching thousands of ABA companies, thousands of psychologists. I mean, it's so overwhelming. So what I wanted to do is the research for them. We personally interview every one of the providers. Why are you doing? And having options for them too, because we know just because somebody's vetted and qualified too doesn't mean it's always a great fit. So helping the parents as far as what to ask for, what to look for, how to find a quality provider. What does that mean to you? And uncovering the questions you don't even know to ask. Because when all these calls are coming in and, your kid's disrupted at school, he can't come back, she's this, and then this is all happening. I mean, your mind is also just overwhelmed. So the community to have parents feel supported, to know that these are quality providers, to also have free education, to be kind of a one-stop shop. So they come here, they can find out what's a final score, what's an IEP. And then we want to expand. We want to also impact the extracurricular activities. How do we train coaches? How do we train instructors to work with our kids? There's a really not a fit for those with soccer and tennis and art and gymnastics and all those. So to me, it's about bringing that community together, educating, stopping the stigmas and stereotypes, and allowing our children to just be loved for exactly who they are and not thinking that they have to be changed or different because that's what the norm says, but that they're embraced. Okay, understand what that means and what that looked like. And then let's look at their strengths and all of that piece of it. So It's very passionate and talk about what that means. I think it's crucial for parents and for the community.
That community is one of the things that's always inspired me most about you, Tiffany, in the last couple of years that we've gotten to know each other is you are extremely intentional at building communities. And tell me more about how do you approach community building? How have you built this phenomenally big provider and parent and educator community over these last couple of years?
I didn't stop to think about it. I didn't want to overanalyze. I just started saying, what do I need as a parent? Who do I need to contact? And I just started calling. I started talking. I started, diving into just different organizations. I've even called several of the districts and introduced myself to the school district saying, hey, here's what I want to do. How do we work collaboratively? Being out there and having those conversations. And from this community, it's so hard for parents to really find, to know, to search. So being able to provide that. And I've talked to so many countless parents. And I would say 90% of them are probably crying when they're talking to me because they're at their lowest point that they don't know what else to do. Their kids get threatened to be kicked out of school. They're not working with them. They're not sure where to go and what services. So it's just working from the heart of what people need to do and just doing it. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, and barriers is because there's so much I want to do. And that's hard for me because I hear a need over here. I'm like, we could do that. I hear a need over here. I'm like, well, I can train all the instructors and work with them. And there's such an opportunity out there for um, more community building because it's not just impacting those who are touched by the neurodivergent community, but it's impacting all of society who needs to understand what this means because we're talking 1 in 5 kids, and those are only the ones diagnosed. So if you think of 1 in 5, let's just up that to 2 out of 5. You're going to be surrounded by neurodivergent individuals, those that diagnose and those that are undiagnosed. It is a part of society. It's who we are. So the blinders need to come off that there's them over there or this over here. We're all in it together.
We absolutely are all in it together. And one thing I really want to highlight for listeners is as they're thinking about starting an organization, there's a couple really important pages they can take out of your book. Wow, your figurative book, Tiffany, and like all the power of what you've done. But the first is this idea of focus on the ultimate consumer or client whom you're serving. And that's what I heard. And I directly witnessed you do in spades is just go out and talk to people whom you want to help. And the more you get their voice directly, as opposed to try to infer or represent what you think they might need, that's really powerful. So that's one. And the other is just tell your story everywhere. And I've always really appreciated that about you. You're telling that story, the 1 in 5 kiddos that are neurodiverse, you're telling stories of parents like literally crying because they don't know what to do and they don't know where to go and they're so overwhelmed. And those two things are super powerful. And, it's really interesting. I know much of your career, Tiffany, was spent in the insurance world. You worked with a number of different payers. So it's really interesting that you pivoted then to working more directly with providers in the community, with parents, and ultimately with kiddos. Like, what did you take away from your prior insurance career that really informed all of this important work you're doing now?
It even started there because when I was an account manager and working with employer groups, and one of the things that had impacted me, and I think I just am one of those people that, based upon those experiences of what I would want to know, how I would want to be treated, how I would want to have this experience be, impacted me. And it started with educating those that are covered with insurance on funding providers. It is such a tough world to navigate when you're thinking, will something be covered? What's going to be covered? How much do I have to pay? What does that education look like? Well, this is what my provider said. And nowadays the reality is you could have one person going to five different providers, all prescribing different drugs, and nobody's looking at what that impact could be to the health of that person. And it's kind of chaotic in that. And so it started with me just having those conversations like, you can question providers, you can interview providers. If your pediatrician, feels giving you the right advice, then start looking around and start engaging differently with those providers. So I think it added so much more in looking at the end of what the consumer is experiencing and just how they're being treated from an insurance standpoint, some of the collaboration of the brokers of what their relationship is to helping those groups and that customer service piece. And it's truly understanding and hearing because when you're talking about your child who's neurodivergent and you're talking about insurance coverage, and we're talking about a lot of money. One procedure, thousands of dollars. So to be able to understand benefits, to be able to have a conversation and coming from a place of compassion, of saying that, you know what, if somebody needs to get their diabetes medication, that they can't afford that, what are the options there? Just like if a mom needs or dad needs help for their child who needs to get, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, just regular mental health therapy, cognitive therapy, what does that look like? And how do you break it down to decide what is first and foremost most important for my child? What is the services that I need to have now to protect my health? So I had an opportunity, through my 20 some year career in health insurance and also becoming a leader for 16 years, where I got to lead sales teams and account management teams. So that also helped too from just advertising and marketing and just really understanding that if you focus on Main Street and you focus on the person who needs those services, that's all you need to do. Everything else will come because you know you're making a difference and you know you're making an impact. So I'm grateful for what I learned through those years of working in that industry and working for various leaders. It also opened my eyes to going to now the discussion around the chamber of what employers, that hire process. I was a hiring manager. I had to interview. I had to go through that. And what were my practices? They are not well thought out. They are not well laid out. I don't know any organization that has something that this is that perspective and it should be critiqued to that job. I interviewed for sales and account management. It's going to be different than when I'm going to interview for somebody who's doing data entry. But it's not how it works today. So much growth and development through that process.
Yeah, well, I want to tease out a thread here. And with your perspective, both as a parent, but then as a community builder and guiding bright minds, like what are the kinds of questions that you encourage parents to ask of prospective providers, pediatricians, and others in the community to make sure they're making the right choice for their kiddo?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. First, it's pausing to have a clear idea of where they're at in their journey. My son now, I've been on this journey since he was 3.5. He's 9 now. And every stage and every phase is going to be different. They've grown here, but oh, we need help here. So first, find a provider. What do you want for your child? What are their specific needs? And write it down. I'm a big You can even ask my husband, I'm like, did you write it down? Did you write it out? I have to visualize what are the pros, what are the cons, and what are the key aspects you want for your child? Is it social, emotional? Is it academic? Is it friends? Is it to be understood? Or is there a medical condition that needs to be addressed? Are there concerns about dyslexia? So write it down first and then ask, especially if it's a pediatrician or whoever it is, how many children have you worked with who are autistic, who are ADHD, who have cerebral palsy, who have executive function or sensory deficits? What does that look like in the wheelhouse? I would also ask them, what is your training back in those areas? Have you been trained? Because a lot of training is not done specific to some practices depending on what that looks like. But I don't know if there's a certain number of hours that pediatricians need to go to a neurodiverse. I'm pretty sure there's not. But those are the questions of what's your familiarity with this? And then, when it comes to whether you're looking for ABA providers, what is the onboarding process? What's the level of communication that you're going to have with me? What is your flexibility in working with me as a parent? I mean, I used to think, especially when I was in corporate America and my son's going through this, I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to send him to occupational therapy and that's going to be good. And I can go about my job. Well, that's not reality. As a parent, you're going to have to be heavily involved. So what does that look like? What training? I would ask the provider, what training and coaching advice do you give to me? So I can continue that after they leave therapy and what that looks like. So I know it's not specific questions I gave because it does depend on the area, but just think about what you want for your child, but asking them if they have experience, what their years of experience, why they're doing what they're doing, and what that meaning is, and the objective of how they're going to help your child.
So, gosh, one of the deeply insightful things I just took away of what you described is that, yes, a pediatrician might be an expert in pediatrics or an ABA provider is an expert in ABA, but as a parent, you're the expert in your kiddo. And no one should ever take that away from you. And more importantly, you should never give up that responsibility to feel like or to communicate your needs. No one can take away that with you being an expert in your parent. And I think that's a critical part of that journey as a parent more generally. And as you described, like writing it down, that is such salient advice, Tiffany. And I don't know, this is anecdotal, but I recently heard, so like 10% of people actually set goals and 1% of people actually write those goals down. If you look at the wealth of the 1% of people in the world, it's phenomenal wealth, right? And I don't know if it's a corollary effect or not, but like write your goals down. And then when it comes to your kiddo, write down what you want for them and what you want and would expect. That feels like really powerful advice.
Well, and trust your gut. I mean, Jonathan, there's been so many people, parents have told me that their physicians have said, no, he's not. No, they don't have success. Like, no, you're just overreacting. So many times. And you have to go with your gut, and when they're starting to be miserable at school or things are happening or getting the phone calls, there's something that's happening. And that's where then, making that decision to say, okay, if my pediatrician's saying, no, you don't need to worry about it, then this is the process. I don't think so. How many autistic kids have you worked with? How many kids with dyslexia have you worked with? Are you familiar with ADHD? And if they're not, it's okay to say, you know what? I think they need to find somebody who has that experience because there's nothing in, this greater than early intervention. When we know a child is struggling socially, emotionally, academically, so whatever developmental areas that they're at, the sooner they can get in and get that support, the better that experience is going to be. So just trust your gut as a mom, as a dad, as a caretaker. You're seeing that, you're feeling that, and just allow yourself that you know what's best.
Well, Tiffany, what's one thing that every business owner and leader should start doing and one thing to stop doing?
Go with your gut and what your heart's telling you to do. If there's a need out there and there's something that needs to be done, do it. I mean, sure, I know there's processes of we have to outline it and analyze, and you don't want to make irrational decisions, but stop over analyzing. Had Danny, Amanda, and I really gone with our initial gut of, should we start the Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce? And we're like, no, we're all have full-time jobs. And if we hadn't allowed to kind of blow over, we would be here. It would not be at fruition. But we ripped it. And within 4 weeks of saying, how can we not? We launched it. Do it because you know it's right. It's needed. and trust yourself and stop, because as we all know, we can have a great thought and then we have those stick, no, you can't do that. No, you're not capable. No, that doesn't make sense. And you allow that to fester. We might not have some of the best organizations we have today. It's about not being afraid to fail and just saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'm jumping in. I walked away from a 22-year career to start something that I didn't know if it was going to be successful, other than in my heart to say, this has to be. Because if I can stop one tear from falling, if I can have one other parent to say, it's going to be okay. If through the chamber we can help another neurodivergent employee find an employer, because the employers have what it takes to hire, to train, to do all of that, that's the path to what creates success in my life.
So well said. And I think you beautifully captured that entrepreneurial leap off a cliff. At a certain point, there's like not any more data you can get. You just have to be like, all right, I'm going to have wings or I'm not. I go. Well said, Tiffany.
I think to be in a society where we're okay to fail, and that's where I am. People are like, well, what about this? I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out along the way. It'll work out.
Well, Tiffany, where can people find you online?
Yes. So find me at guidingbrightminds.com. So it's just www.guidingbrightminds.com. There is a list of the directory. We have education. We have events on there. You can also write to me. You can join our newsletter. There's a where to ask questions. So if you're a parent and you want to find us and ask questions about your journey, please go out there, put that information on there. We also host 2 free webinars a month. I'm big on education. I have a variety of topics because there's such a variety of topics to discuss. So that's how you can find me, is at Guiding Bright Minds. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. We do have a Facebook support group. So there's just different ways in which to definitely follow me. And on Facebook is where I advertise webinars that we have coming up, events that our providers are doing, podcasts that our providers are doing, all books that they've written. So all kinds of ways to get that education information. And then if you're interested in learning more about the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce, it's cndcc.org. So it's the abbreviation CNDCC, so the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce.org. And we have many different goals that you can look at, from students starting at $100 a year membership, because we want to have that community come together, to employer large groups over 50 employees at $1,500 for the membership for the chamber. And we just launched, September 16th, the official date. So we have a lot more we want to do, a lot more we want to provide, but we'll have blogs and other ways to educate you on our website as well.
Awesome. I'll drop all of those links in the show notes. So Tiffany, are you ready for our hot take questions?
Oh, there we go.
All right, here we go. So you're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
You know what? I really want to be remembered for being a great mom and bringing joy. I truly have made a difference, but that my son is so happy and loving life. I just want to be for being a great mom.
Hear, hear. What's your most important self-care practice?
Intentionality. I have stopped watching TV, started reading, started meditating, starting allowing that peaceful evening routine. So many people tell me they don't have time to do something. How much TV are you watching? Because believe me, once you shut that thing off, that is great. I've had my shows, but intentionality in what I do and who I am.
What's your favorite song?
I'm going to say The Rose by Bette Midler. It was played at my wedding, just so you know. And I want to play it at my funeral. It's one of the songs I just loved. My middle name is Rose. And it's just something that, so yeah, through with my bachelor.
Old school, but old school is new school. I love it. Tiffany, if you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, just to love yourself, to truly just be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm happy with the person that I am. And knowing that you got to trust your gut and trust your heart. And I think my 18-year-old self would be pretty satisfied with where I am today. A lot of journeys on the road, but just love life.
Now, you can only wear one style of footwear. What would it be?
Oh, Ugg slippers.
Uggs, so comfortable. Right on. To go along with the love yourself. That's a perfect segue and ending. Hey, Tiffany, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. It's been great catching up.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much. Thank you for all you do and shedding light on this wonderful community. So I appreciate it.
Hey, kind listener. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, can you do me a favor? Give me a rating on your favorite podcast channel. It helps more values-aligned people like you find the pod. Till next time, peace.